Hey, drawing class. Just wanted to check in from my studio to yours. Offer you some supplement videos that you can do at home. No, required assignments, but we've covered, proportional drawing, geometric construction, light and shadow, and I think it would be a good time right now to apply all that knowledge and review it to some of your live action at home, choosing your own objects, setting those up. So that's what we're going to go over today. In the past, I've just given you reference, or you've chosen out of my reference files. But this time I thought, since you're at your home, you could use some of the stuff you have around. I've just grabbed an assortment of objects from around my studio. But I just want to give you some guidelines to help you choose maybe some good ones before setting up our still life kind of display. So remember, make it interesting. Something you want to draw. We're going to practice everything we've practiced up until this point, like dynamic drawing, confident drawing symmetrical objects using our axes, good ellipses, perspective. So the simpler these objects are, the better. That being said, you don't want it to be, I don't know, like a square. So look for something that is a little bit interesting to you. Think about the geometric solids. Think about, cone-esque shapes. Maybe this is like too simple. I'm thinking in a setup we want at least 2 or 3 objects. 3 probably would be best for some interaction. We don't want it to be just a single object unless it's like very complex. I'm assuming I know a lot of you love cars. You might want to do a car. So that's actually, if we think about it, it's going to be a lot of like cylinders kind of for the wheels and then a little bit more elaborate things. But I'd really highly recommend keeping them fairly simple and, devoid of too many patterns, right? So the simpler, the better. If this guy seems intimidating, then maybe grab your favorite coffee cup. Just looking over here, I grabbed my brush holder, and it's a nice simple cylinder, but it is fairly reflective. So another thing to look for is like things of matte quality. All right, you can see how that catches the light a little bit more evenly. Kind of get a nice highlight, half-tone shadow shape over here. Where this, we've got some really highly reflective surface going on. Not that that's a bad thing. We're going to cover, how to capture the differences in that quality, especially when it gets to inventing. But for now, I'd really like to focus on proportions, shadow and light separation, and this is more this and things like, transparent quality things are more based on observation, observing the distortion through the glass or the reflection in the material. So for this, I might go with a more matte quality kind of thing. Still cylindrical in design, simple, solid, easy to construct. With the added benefit is I can arrange, maybe some of these brushes for a still life pattern. So, maybe I like that with the brushes. Even the brushes themselves are pretty geometric in construction, long cylinders, kind of ovoid in the center, coming to some of them, more of a planar rectangle shape at the end. Simple things like if you have, I have canvases around, but maybe you have like a book. Maybe that's something you want to place in your still life. Good for showing perspective and plane changes. A great one I thought of, if you don't want to do like your coffee cup, would be if you have any plants around. I've got this one that offers like a really nice geometric base. We've got some more organic shapes. Again, this can be simplified into kind of like a planar description of each of those petals. The more like leaf-like and more foliage-heavy plants and less petal-oriented plants, it's going to be easier to describe and easier to catch. You can see like the light versus the shadow planes. So you get light, shadow. So that's going to be easier to describe. Even ones in more kind of classical kind of pots, you still got the nice cylinder going, all built around that symmetry axis, and then kind of that conical shape right here, and then the more organic stuff, but still very planar. So this would be, I think, a really great one to draw. Kind of gives you the more of the construction down here, and then we'd be viewing and basing all of our drawing on the observation we see up there. It would be really great if once we set these up, if you worked from life. I think the actual act of setting these up, handling them, placing them, lighting them, is going to make us think more spatially about them. And that's what you really want to be able to do when we start, drawing from imagination. You want to be able to flip an object around in your mind and on the page, right? So the actual act of setting this, arranging it, different compositions, I think is going to be hugely helpful for us. Now the second part that goes into this, so let's say for this still life setup, I go with this nice simple matte patternless brush holder, and then a few brushes. Let's go with 3, nice odd number. And we've got 2 objects, maybe a book. More so and I'll talk more about this when we set up the still life and we light it. When we get to composing and arranging, we'll be want to thinking about, see back here, negative shapes, positive shapes, overlaps, and tangencies. That comes to play in the composition, but also from the arranging composition of the still life, it also comes into play when we're going to be arranging like a layout on a page for our final project. So all that stuff, even though it'll work for this, it also works for like a page layout composition. I want to be thinking about differentiation of size. So we've got some nice medium size objects, some large size objects. This could be considered small. I might want to look for one more thing. Small, maybe more rounded in shape. Got AirPod case. But it could be like a sphere or even like a fruit. It'd be very classical still life if I had any fruit around. I would say aim for 3. Keep them simple. Keep them as geometric in shape. Any simple like tech products are going to be, they're designed around aesthetic principles, so they will be excellent for drawing. Even the little charger ports, that might be a good one. But I want it to be simple and interesting to you. That's going to be that balance you have to find. What do you want to set up, light, and draw, and what's going to be simple enough that it's not too intimidating. Okay, next we're going to talk about controlling our light, because this is all right and good to draw this, but right now I'm kind of have a floodlight on me, and so it's destroying all of our shadow shapes and any form we can gain from that. So great for proportional and construction drawing, not so good for light and shadow. So we're going to talk about that next. Before that, though, I did find my skull. So this would be like a great small-sized object that would kind of balance out this larger, medium-sized round shape. And if you're too nervous or intimidated to go so complex, keep it simple. But like that's a good, nice little, we have some variation there, which creates interest. We'll talk more about that when composing. Okay, but let's say we got our objects we want to draw. Before we even consider arranging them, sketching them, we need to set them up and control our lighting situation. From imagination, on a page, we need to do that. In life, when drawing from observation, we do that as well. At school, we usually work from reference, just because we can't leave setups up that long, and it's easier to have each of you pull up your individual printout reference each class period. But now, you guys are at home. You got plenty of time. You can set these things up. They can sit up. You can work on it for as little or as long as you want each day. So you'll want to set it up and you'll want to control the light. So you select your objects. Now we're going to worry about the lighting. So there's 2 ways to do this. It's either to get a very strong light. Now we have at school, we've got clamp lights. At your home, you might not have that. So that's okay. What we can use instead is any old lamp. And remember, this is drawing, so we're not worrying about color per se. So it's okay. Doesn't matter if it's a warm light bulb, cold light bulb, slightly colored light bulb. Any old lamp you have in the house, we can use some tin foil to direct the light flow. All right, so we can create that cone. Try and keep it away from the bulb. It's not gonna catch on fire. Definitely don't leave this unattended. But you can direct almost like a spotlight the direction you want for this. Okay, so even in a daylight-filled room, if there's a lot of windows, or if you just can't block out all the lights, I realize you guys aren't working in studios, this is going to make a world of difference as far as directing light on an object. Let's see if this works. Right? So, I know it's a little blown out right now, but even with this room full of light and like a bright light flooding a floodlight down on me, you can still see a nice separation of light, halftone, and shadow, right? Now, we can take that a step further. All it takes is nothing fancy, a cardboard box. I'm sure we've all got them lying around. Or, I'll do you one better, presentation board. I just cut it into I just cut it down the center. So this is like one of those presentation boards. Cut it in half. You've got these nice little, got a corner now, and this is what we call a shadow box. Because it creates shadow, you can see it's blocking out all the overhead light. And then we have this nice directed light. Look at the nice shadow shape you get against the back wall. You get this nice protection, and it doesn't need to be a complete black room, but it does create a little bit of control there. We're going to go over this. I'm going to set this all up and show you how we can compose a still life. But, where did my escape go? You can see just with that, blocking out that. Now, those halftones, those halftones and shadows are going to be even more contrasted and dramatic, and thus easier to capture and draw. Okay, so what do you need to do this? You could do this in any old box. Look at top, sides, put in there controlled lighting, turn off the lights overhead. You've got a nice, look at the shadow on the back side of that skull. Got a nice light and shadow. Any old lamp with some tin foil, you can take the lamp cover off. Or if you're lucky enough, a clamp light with one of these guys on there, but not necessary. I would say even worst comes to worst, you don't have a lamp, you don't have direct source of lighting, this controlled set back a little bit into that shadow box is still going to create an effect of light and shadow versus it being out here where everything's just blown out, right? And why is light and shadow so important? That's what's going to give us that three-dimensional quality, that form, okay? So what do you need for this? You need your still life objects, select what they're going to be, try and keep them simple. Not too much pattern, not too much transparency or reflectivity. Think about the geometric solids. Spheres, cones, cubes, rectangles, ovals, anything kind of verging on that. And then avoid patterns. And look for a variety of size and number. 3, small, medium, large if you can, and make it interesting to you. Next, something to light it with. We're going to control the lighting. And then, if you can't do that, a shadow box to help protect it. Okay, so next I'm going to take this and we're going to knock out all these lights, set this up, and then we're going to talk about just composing and arranging for interest, which really just comes down to personal taste. But I'll give you some tips on how to make it interesting with variety.
Okay, so now we've got our 3 objects, 3+ objects. Pretty simple. Cube, cylinder, mini stretched out cylinders, maybe a little conical shape there, you know, a little sphere with some complex shapes on the front side if we want to get a little bit more detailed. Next, we've got our light source. It can either be a clamp light or a lamp with some foil directing the light, and then a cardboard box or pieces of cut up cardboard or presentation board cut in half, ideally. So now we're going to start to compose and control the light. So let's first set up the shadow box. Now, one thing to be mindful of is that, you notice I chose the black presentation board. Black's just going to absorb more of the light, the ambient light, and some of the direct light. So you get a nice contrast of light and shadow, but you also don't get a ton of reflected light, right? So whenever light hits this, it's going to bounce, and it's kind of going to destroy some of the shadow shapes a little bit, making them a little bit harder to discern. So the darker the cardboard, the better. You can use regular cardboard, maybe with some black paper on it or black tablecloth. But I've got this. So let's set up the base. Now the other thing is, just like the reflectivity of the materials, and why I went with matte over super reflective, same thing with any kind of tabletop. If you're working on like a glass tabletop where this has like a slight sheen to it, that's going to kick up a lot of light as well, and so that'll make the shadow shapes hard to see. So we're trying to, what we're doing is we're gearing everything to work towards us, to help us, to make it easier for us to see that light and shadow. Okay, so what I'm doing now is just, most of the light from this room is coming in from the left. The windows and major lights are over there. So I'm just kind of setting this up to block most of that, facing this dark corner over here. Now I'm just going to throw these in there. I kind of know I want this to be like the base down at the bottom. Kind of had that in mind from the beginning. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to arrange this stuff yet, but I'm going to kill the lights. See, everything goes pretty dark, and then we've got our lamp with foil or a clamp light. It can either be, you know, this is where that spatial awareness I was talking about comes really in handy. The more you play with this, the more we can kind of see how, when the light hits, how the shadows react. So you can see those cast shadows. We've talked a lot about form versus cast shadows. So see how they're kind of twisting, especially with all that ambient light blocked out. We can really see these interactions now. And you should be thinking about all the stuff we talked that's related to those. Soft edges versus sharp edges. Soft, sharp, so on, so on. Planar edges, so it's going to be a little bit sharper right here. And then as it extends out, we get softer and fuzzier. We'll cover all this in the drawing process as well. But be noticing that. Be noticing how, as the light changes, it's either adding detail or taking it away. This all comes in handy when we start designing products and we start adding details and we start establishing light sources to our products. What's the most beneficial and communicative for those products, right? Okay, so we've got the light blocked out. We've got this single light source established. Now let's talk about a little bit about composition. I'm happy with this. I'm gonna step back. It's key to keep stepping back and taking a look in from where you're going to be actually drawing. So I'm going to be drawing from back here. So kind of stand back and get a good... You don't want to be drawing too close to your setup. When we set up our drawing pads and such, we don't want to be right over the top of it. A good measure is at least 2.5 lengths. So, you know, the height of this thing is, you know, we want to go 2.5 spaces back. So it puts us way back here. And that's going to kind of eliminate any distortion and just give us a good overall view of the whole thing. So as you're arranging, just be thinking about that. Okay. Let's play around with these. To get something that feels good, keep stepping back. And what I'm looking for here is nice positive and negative shapes, right? So you kind of want to envision this as a final drawing, a 2D image, and you want to be thinking about, you know, what's this shape, this negative shape compared to this negative shape. We don't want it like, you know, perfectly symmetrical. We want to create some variety in there. We kind of want to make it interesting and it looks like it was on accident, but really we have to really think through this to create that interest. You know, we don't want these equally spaced apart. If we can, we have to overlap them. Now you want to keep stepping back to make sure that the perspective is right and that we get that overlap. So this is kind of nice now, how the light's kind of coming from the side and creating this shadow shape, and then it really, this bright side right here kind of pops out against that shadow shape. But one thing I do want to be careful of is the light's coming directly from the side, so it's kind of cutting this shape almost in half. It would be nice, kind of a good place to err on the side of, kind of standard lighting to really create some nice form and volume for our objects is a 3/4. So coming from like 45 degrees out and lighting it, so that way we get some nice, a large chunk of light, a little bit of shadow, and you know, we should be getting some halftone on the side there as it rolls back around into shadow. So that's kind of nice. You can see how sharper, the shadows become sharper as the light gets closer, more diffused and softened as it moves back. That's not too bad. You know, you can, don't be afraid. I'm also looking at like this light and shadow and the positive, negative shapes those are creating back there. It's all going to be part of that visual image in the end. So I want it to be pleasing. I like how this all kind of falls into shadow back here. This, you know, might be, I don't know how much of that I want to detail out and spend drawing, so I don't know how much of it I want to be illuminated. You know, that would be easy. And this is kind of the process. It's kind of a touch and go. I like the variation up in here. I like the height that's giving me. I think the height over here, though, if I'm picturing the image, needs to be balanced on the left side. So having that shadow come. Also, if you're using foil, you can always play with it and kind of help redirect that light. That's going to be super helpful. But I want to use this shadow shape to kind of, we have a lot of height, positive shape over here, so I want a lot of height over here to balance this area. I just don't want it to be detail and then on my page nothing. So really thinking about the kind of composition of the entirety. That's feeling better. I'm saying feeling because that's that personal choice I was talking about. It's kind of like you feel it out. What feels good to you? And then you just want to kind of check it in with these things, these positive, negative shapes. Wherever you can, you know, have some overlapping. That's going to enhance the depth of the image. When everything's separate, like if none of these things were touching, but they're all kind of just, you know, spread out, then they're unassociated and you don't know the actual size or relation to one another. So, you know, maybe this was up in there, maybe having this kind of draw the eye in here, break that little plane up, maybe coming out of that shadow shape towards the viewer. Have fun with it. If you have an object that is kind of more narrative, you can play with that. You know, think about the story you're kind of telling. I don't know what this tells, the death of a painter. I'm not really sure. I'm thinking more about like the visual weight of the elements, I guess, in this setup. You can see how minute it is. I'm not changing anything too big. I'm just kind of looking at the overall thing. The positive, the negative shapes, overlapping. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was the tangencies. So as you're overlapping objects, you want to avoid tangencies. And I'll show you what that is. That would be where some things are about to overlap. See how it's getting closer to that cylinder, but they're a tangency is where it just becomes tangent and it's not. So right about there, there's no overlap. And what that's doing is it's not telling, maybe there's a little bit right here. It's not telling us, is that skull in front or behind that cylinder? Because it's not overlapping at all. So it kind of destroys depth. So you want there to be no tangencies, preferably, because that's going to create an awkward tension for the viewer. You want the viewer to know, oh, that skull is in front of that cylinder. That might be like awkward that far forward. It kind of might be way too aligned. So you want that balance where it's overlapping, as long as it's not just like kissing the edge, so you get a nice sense of depth. So look for overlaps, avoid tangencies, and then play around with a variety of positive and negative shapes. You don't want anything too repeated within the image. And I think, that'll be good for now. I'm trying to think forward to when we get to the drawing stage and how we can use plumb lines and envelopes. And I think that will work. Not liking catching this detail in here, so just trying to simplify that a little bit. And there, see, I've created a tangency on accident. So I might not like that. I like how when that gets closer, we get a sharper edge there. See how much back and forth there is involved. This is probably, I'd say, the longest part of the creating process. But the more time you spend here getting an image or setup that you really like and really are excited about, then the drawing just flies by. You're not kind of making corrections in the drawing to help this part. It's all about this planning up front. It's kind of when you change one element, it kind of changes the whole setup. That's too close. Yeah, maybe even some overlaps in the brushes might be good. Okay, so that's the kind of things I'm looking for. I might mess around with this for a little bit longer, and then we'll sit down and we'll do the lay-in, the proportional lay-in process. So this is nothing new, per se. You haven't been drawing from life. So drawing from life will be new, but the same principles apply when we do the proportional lay-in, using our envelopes, our plumb lines, and kind of our notional space. Okay? Okay, so I'm happy with my setup. I ended up pulling out the other brush, but just as a reminder, look for nice variation, look for the positive, negative shape, the positive shape of the cast shadow. Once you're happy with your setup and you've got everything feeling good, I would go ahead and mark off your setup with some tape. You can either do some whatever tape you have lying around. This way, if it gets moved or if you have to tear it down, if you have to set up in a common space or something, you can always reset it up. So I always like to start by marking off my light source. Just the base of it, where does that sit? And then often this gets moved around, so the other thing you want to mark off is the shadow shapes of your objects. That way, if this starts to shift, you can always put it back where it goes and then line up the tape with your shadow shape. Okay, so a little bit, kind of on all just the major ones. The cast shadows are really easy to find, right? Because they're sharp edged. And then if you expect the whole shadow box to be torn down or moved or shuffled, it might be a good idea to mark you know, the edges of that as well. Maybe the base where you want the book to be. I like the black tape just because I'm working on a black surface, so it's not going to catch my eye or make it into the drawing in the end. You know, maybe the front edge of this guy right here. And then often what's forgotten is like kind of the cast shadow back here. Got this guy, but maybe up here. Just so you do the top of that one. Just so if this starts to rotate, it's like, okay, well, let's see that we know it was right about there. So you can rearrange that. Okay, so just some tape to mark it off. Then you've got your setup kind of marked, so if it gets torn down, moved, it's easy to set back up. Make sure you have a nice clean eraser, either the kneadable eraser or, you know, a very clean end of a pencil, or like a separate, kind of what they call those, a pink pearl. And then you want your drawing pad. If you just have, you know, printer paper, that's completely fine. Just as in class, make sure you have several sheets of it so that you have some nice padding. So whatever board it's on, a clipboard or a piece of cardboard, or whatever you have to make it sturdy, that it's not going to pick up that texture. And then you have some nice padding so that you can get some nice light faint lines, okay? And then we're going to set up a chair, preferably a desk. Here's the other thing is we don't want to, I'm probably going to be sketching flat so you guys can watch me with the camera looking down at it. But you guys want to be, remember, at least 3 lengths back of the still life so it doesn't distort the perspective. And then you probably want to tilt your paper. The idea there is that you're looking straight down at it. If it's flat on the table, you're looking at an angle, right? So you'd want to be up like this, which is very uncomfortable. So tilt your paper, set it in your lap so you're looking perpendicular to your paper so you're not getting any distortion when you're working up here, making things kind of larger, because then when you put it rotated up to like how it would be presented, it's going to be all distorted. So try and angle it like this. Make sure you've got a nice sturdy board, lots of padding, pencil, eraser, and then next time we're going to jump into the proportional lay-in using our bounding boxes and our plumb lines, looking at the light and dark shapes. Okay, but I think that's enough for this week. Everyone stay healthy, stay sane, choose something interesting but simple and get it set up. You know, you could even do a few setups and take photos. Up to you. All right, see you next week.